So let's start at the very top of our lesson plan template where you will see two spaces. One is for context and rationale. The other one is for central focus. Now the context and rationale, the purpose behind this is to more or less say, here's the context, these are the students I'm teaching, and this is my reasoning behind why I'm teaching this lesson in this particular way with this particular group of students. And so you will notice that that is the very first thing you see at the top, and it's because it's one of the more important things. It provides us with some background knowledge of the students you are teaching and why this lesson is important for this group of students. And so your context might include things such as demographic information. So you might include things like the number of students you have, the race ethnicity breakdown of the student body in your classroom as well as in your school, the setting of the school, rural, urban, suburban, interests of students in your community and class, what you know about students' previous knowledge, all those types of things are fair play. And so when you're thinking about the context, this is specific to the context, you are trying to tell us about the students who you are teaching and what you know about them, both within the school and outside of school as well. I will show you an example of what I mean by this. The one trick that we find a lot of people, specifically early career teachers, falling into is this trap of talking mostly about deficits rather than assets of the community. And so there may be some major issues happening in your community with regard to socioeconomic status, and perhaps you have a community of high poverty within your school. But you don't want to just address this as a deficit mindset of saying, well, a lot of our students struggle with making ends meet, as far as families go, or they don't have opportunities to do homework, and so I don't ask them to do homework. The idea of focusing on the assets of what is positive within that community, and not just saying, well, I don't get a lot of parental support because parents work late night shifts, and so I can't hardly do anything with this class, is a trap that a lot of people sort of fall into. And the idea is that you really want to focus on the things that are the positives within your community and the things that you can help change as well. And I'll try to show you how I would do that in my sample lesson plan. So through your description of your context, you should be able to situate why this lesson is appropriate for students, and that comes in your rationale. So it is a justification for why this lesson is important for students. So we established this at the top of the lesson plan because of the critical importance of understanding our students and using this knowledge of the adolescents and young adults we teach in order to make informed pedagogical and curricular decisions. So as you look at my sample lesson plan that I provided, you can see that the context/rationale is a lengthy narrative. It is not a bullet point, these are the students and this is what I'm going to do. It is a narrative explaining, first of all, this is the makeup of my students. So in this made-up example, I had 85% white, 5% black, 5% Asian, 5% Latinx. The students at the school have diverse interests. Many of my students enjoy hunting and fishing as well as playing sports. Many of my students also have a close affiliation with their church and often attend services on Sundays and Wednesday evenings. So I'm providing that as a general context in case something like that might be valuable for just a larger picture of the student body that I'm working with. You can see in red it says, in this particular class, I have a lot of students who participate in extracurricular activities such as sports and band. Many of the students' parents work at the local paper mill and have plans to follow in their parents' footsteps when they graduate high school. So this is important. This was roughly based on the students who I worked with in a rural community in North Carolina. And the idea of this lesson plan talking about careers, having an understanding of where students perhaps generally plan to go and what they plan to do after they graduate high school is useful in trying to situate a conversation about careers as it relates to literature, particularly in The Giver. And I'll show you how I make that connection in my rationale. But as we go on, it says, most students do not identify as readers outside of school, but we are working hard to develop reading stamina this year. So again, I'm not focusing on the deficits that these students just don't read very much. It's a way of saying, Right now, perhaps their reading stamina isn't where I was hoping it would be, but that is something that we are working on this entire school year. So I try not to situate it in a deficit mindset. It is something that we are developing and helping them work on this year. We worked on this during our reading of Speak by Laurie Halse Anderson in our previous unit. And so, talking about where students previously perhaps worked on specific skills is useful. You can talk about what they learned last unit. You can talk about what they learned last semester. You could talk about what perhaps you know that they learned with a previous teacher in a previous grade. So, all of those are fair play in establishing a context and rationale. As we go on in green, it says we talked about characterization, setting, and empathy during that unit, which we will be building on as we read The Giver. So if we worked on those three skills, characterization, setting, and empathy, it is okay to build on those and recall them. Eventually, you're also going to want to help them develop new skills as well. But you can see in providing the context, saying we've been here and we're going to continue working on these particular skills is useful as we provide a rationale or a justification for why we're doing what we're doing. So going on to the next paragraph, this is really where my rationale can be found. For this particular lesson, I wanted to help students as we begin reading The Giver by helping them develop connections to the text by considering how their interests might play a role in the types of careers they one day choose, and how the loss of choice when it comes to a job might impact their willingness and ability to do their job. So in red, I say because most students have already expressed an interest in working in the local paper mill when they grow up, I want to use this activity as a way to hear about what role choice should play in determining a future career. So in the context, you can see in red this particular, you can see I've talked about their careers here, and then I bring that back into my rationale and saying, because I know this about my students, I'm justifying this particular lesson in this particular way. I'm talking about careers. I know this about my students, and I want to see if we can sort of unpack that a little bit deeper as we talk about careers in the book that we're reading. Going on, I will use this opening discussion as a baseline for understanding as students read chapters 1 and 2 in class, particularly when they consider the process of assignments in The Giver. Assignments, if you've not read The Giver, is where students at age 12 are assigned a particular job. And so they don't have choice. And so trying to make that parallel between students, the expectation that a parent might fill in the shoes of a parent moving into a job at the paper mill is some sort of parallel that I want to make here. In addition, we will be using class time to read the first 2 chapters of The Giver in order to check for comprehension and provide background knowledge as it pertains to characterization and setting. So again, characterization and setting is here in the context and rationale, and then characterization and setting is down here as well. It's in the context up here and the rationale down here. And this notion of empathy, I think, also comes into play when we talk about the connections that students will make with Jonas and the other characters in The Giver, and this notion of not getting a choice in your career. And so the next part is the central focus. In this section, you want to provide a narrative of the important understandings and core concepts that you want students to develop within the learning segment. So it should align with the content standards and learning objectives, something we will talk about next. And it should address the subject-specific components in the learning segment. It's worth noting that this is not a list of facts and skills. Similar to your context and rationale, this should be a narrative written in a descriptive language to say this is what we're going to do. So if you look down here in the third bullet point, you might do something like a central focus for the learning segment might be analyzing the author's use of language to develop a theme within a complex text. So the learning segment would focus on conceptual understandings of figurative language and characterization, citing evidence and appropriate reasoning. So you can see there's a lot of that discipline-specific language that comes with literature. Notions of figurative language and characterization, citing evidence and appropriate reasoning. So you want to make sure that you have that discipline-specific language in your narrative. So for my central focus for this particular lesson on The Giver, the central focus for this lesson is establishing background knowledge for The Giver. Because this is the first day of reading the novel, it will be important to model how good readers attend to characterization, setting, and the beginning of a book. In addition, we will discuss elements of dystopian novels. That's more of a unit level study. For the giver, it will be important for students to consider how getting assigned a career at age 12 might make them feel, as a way of empathizing with Jonas and the other 12s in the book. And so you can see where it's really situating the content knowledge that you want students to have within your central focus in a relatively short narrative. It's worth noting that this will likely change on a daily basis. Your context may not change very much for a unit, but for your lesson level, your rationale will probably change because your lessons are going to change. So you might think about how you might write your context rather broadly so that you can draw on that often throughout your lesson plans. So your context will likely stay the same, but your rationale will change, as will your central focus. That will change on a regular basis. So that's context rationale as well as central focus. There's a lot there. Again, as always, feel free to send me an email, but we will also discuss this a little bit more in class.